Pastor Ann and her staff pulling that together, particularly after just having journeyed all the way back from the southern and eastern hemisphere to the northern and western hemisphere from the trip back. I was talking to Jose, and he was telling me how wonderful the flight was on the way back. Well, yeah. On one occasion, my wife and I had been traveling. We had been in New Zealand, and we came back home for a couple of days and then went to South America, to Argentina. And the interesting thing was, it was right at the end of summer and the beginning of fall. So what had happened, it was winter in New Zealand, and we came home and it was summer at home, and in a couple of days it turned fall, and then we flew to South America where it was spring. So we hit all 4 seasons in less than a week's period of time, which is a unique thing to do that I do not recommend to you at all. It was not an easy trick, but good to have Ann and Jose back. And Jose tells me that he is almost back on Eastern Daylight Time Zone by now, but it does take a while. Thanks for the diligent work in getting our kids ready this week for this delightful time to share together on Family Sabbath. Nice to share together on Family Sabbath. And today we have the Samson Syndrome. The reason I tied these two together is because I'm bringing you an example of a terrible way for families to develop. This is a terrible story. But out of this terrible story, there are lessons that we can learn, not only for disastrous families, but for good families as well. For disastrous ones that we have experienced, to be able to pull something out of tragedy. And for the rest of us who have been spared that so far, to say, what are the lessons we can learn from this story that will help our families to grow strong, to give leadership to the church and to the community and to society? Who could have guessed 7 days ago what kind of horrific things we would see and experience this past week? I don't know how many of you were watching yesterday as this was coming to a conclusion in Boston. What a gripping and horrifying story of something that went wrong somehow between family members, between nationalism and hatred, and who knows what all the details are at this point. But who could have guessed we would have spent the last week watching something so terrible? And the interesting thing of it is, as pleased as I am that the situation has been resolved, yet I am not happy with the loss of life, even of the perpetrators as well as those who died in the bombing. That does not bring me joy. I am glad that justice triumphs, and indeed we're going to look at that today and see how it can happen. But even when justice triumphs, there are so often such tragedies that are irreversible. So today we are going to look at a story which has to have a disclaimer. In fact, the last couple of days, I've had 5 at a moment, grandchildren, but 4 grandchildren staying at our house. And the littlest one, my little granddaughter, is 7 years old. How many 7-year-old girls here? Let's see, how many? There's one. Yeah. Okay, that's the age of my granddaughter. She has 2 front teeth missing. Anybody like that? Oh. But as we were watching this, it became apparent that the repeating over and over and over again of the story was too much for my little 7-year-old granddaughter. And we turned it off and sent her to the other room to do something else, because the news was just too horrific. So I'm giving you a disclaimer this morning out of the book of Judges, that the book of Judges is too horrific. I do not recommend the book of Judges for the faint-hearted and the idealistic. As a matter of fact, I don't recommend that you read it very often. But there does come a time on Family Sabbath that we're going to deal with something from the book of Judges, the Samson Syndrome. There are things about the story of Samson that we have loaded with our own notions that are simply not part of the story. We're going to work through some of that. But before we get into that, I want to read you the disclaimer for the book of Judges. Actually, this is the last verse of the last chapter, chapter 21 of Judges, which follows one of the most horrific stories in the whole book. Don't read it now. If you want to read it some other time, okay, don't read it now. But the last verse, which I think maybe should have been the first verse of the book of Judges. Maybe it would have saved us a whole lot of horrific things if we had put this verse as the first verse of the book of Judges. Here's what it says. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. That's the disclaimer. And as I say, maybe it would have been a good idea to have been warned about that before we even started with this book. Now, let's face the fact that even in the days when they did have kings, things weren't too great either. But the disclaimer of the book of Judges is, reader beware. My 7-year-old granddaughter, I'm not going to read this to her, but we'll do all right as we work through it. Don't be frightened. You don't have to take the kids out. But we are going to try and learn some things from this that can lead us to the kind of families that God wants us to be, because God has good intentions with this. One more bit of disclaimer for you. The book of Judges and other parts of the Old Testament as well, something I've told you before, and I'll tell you again, that Judges and the Old Testament are not a record of the way God wanted things to be. They're a record of the way things were, and the extent to which God is willing to go, even at the risk of being misunderstood, in order to try to reach people. Now let me give you that one more time, because I don't want you to miss this. It is not a record of the way God wanted things to be. It is a record of the extent to which God is willing to go, even at the risk of being misunderstood and misrepresented, in order to try to reach people. And when they're that bad off, the potential for us misunderstanding and misinterpreting God is enormous. Okay, the disclaimers. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what they thought was right in their own eyes. It is not a record of the way God wanted things to be. So we use a horrific story today to try to help us realize that God, even in the horrific experience that we've had this last week, will still try to do something to reach people. Okay. After that, you're scared to death to have me start this story, aren't you? Judges, the 13th chapter. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. A certain man of Zorah. Okay, Zorah is down near the Mediterranean. Not on the coast, but not far away. Zorah down in central southern Palestine. The angel of the Lord appeared, a certain man named Zorah, named Manoah, from the clan of the Danites, had a wife who was sterile and remained childless. Now, there's something interesting here. This, of course, is the New International, the way it's translated. It says, from the clan of the Danites. That's an important word for you. Because society there did not function as we see society functioning today. There was no king. Remember that disclaimer? They did not have a national law. They did not have a national police force. They did not have a national government. It says he was from the what? The clan. Oh, you know what clans are, don't you? Seems that we are dealing with that kind of clannish type thinking so much these days in the strife that is going on in the world. The terrorism that takes place seems to rise out of this clannish nationalistic notion that people think it is their right, their duty to inflict this kind of horrific event. It gives you a little concept of what we're dealing with here. There was no national law. There was no national government. It was clans, and the Philistines were in charge at this point in this area. A certain man of Zorah named Manoah from the clan of the Danites had a wife who was sterile and remained childless. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, you are sterile and childless, but you're going to conceive and have a son. Well, that was good, exciting news. Now see to it that you drink no wine. Oh, we're getting off on some very good things here. Well, we're trying to get this boy raised up not to be a drunkard. Well, that's a good thing, isn't it? Well, that's a good thing, isn't it? Okay. Of course that's a good thing. We don't want this guy to be a drunkard. Another one here. Drink no wine or fermented drink. Do not eat anything unclean. That's a good thing, isn't it? That's a good thing, isn't it? Okay. Because you will conceive and give birth to your son. No razor shall be used on his head. Now that seems like a good thing to me too. No razor is to be used on his head, because the boy is to be a Nazirite, set apart to God from birth, and he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. Now that was a good thing, wasn't it? You bet it was. So this story starts out with some really good things. That God was trying to do something to minister, now get this carefully, to minister not only to his chosen people who happened to be the clan of Dan at that point, but is there just a possibility, work with me now, is there just a possibility that he wanted to do something for the Philistines too? Are you a little slow on that one? Was he not interested in saving them? And was there just a possibility that this was what God wanted to be, some kind of an entering wedge through Samson and the tribe of Dan and his people, who could spread his salvation to others as well? You know, it's so easy for us to write this off. In fact, we even use the term, well, they're the Philistines, as though God only wanted to destroy them. I don't buy that notion. As a matter of fact, he very clearly indicates that they are to be a light. His people are to be a light to the nations. And God is dealing with a time of tribalism and violence, terrorism. He's not writing these people off. It does not make me happy that people died in the bombing in Boston. It does not make me happy that the terrorists are dying either, because they all need God's salvation and grace. No razor may be used on his head, because the boy is to be a Nazirite set apart to God from birth, and he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. Now we're going to skip on down. Don't have time to read all of this book. We're going to skip on down Judges 13, verse 24. And what happens between there is the woman is terrified because she has seen this angel of God. And she tells her husband, and they pray that the angel will come back. And so she's working in the field again. And the angel comes back, and she runs to get her husband. And then together they talk to the angel. And he is so terrified of the whole thing that he says, "We're dead. We've seen God. We're not going to survive." The Old Testament is not a record of the way things God would like things to be. It is a record of the extent to which he is willing to go to try to reach people, even at the risk of being misunderstood, okay? "We're doomed to die," he said to his wife. "We've seen God." But his wife answered, "If the Lord meant to kill us, he would not have accepted our burnt offerings." So we go to verse 24. He even has to get it through the heads of the mother and the father that he is blessing, that he's not going to kill them. This is a setting in which God has to work. "The woman gave birth to a boy and named him Samson. He grew, and the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him while he was in I never can say that one. Mahana, or whatever it is, Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol." Now, you don't know where all that is, so I'm not even going to bother. It was down near the Mediterranean in Palestine. That's enough. Okay. Samson begins to grow up. Samson went down to Timnah, which is about 3 or 4 miles away. So get that concept in mind. From Zorah to Timnah is about 3 or 4 miles. And the clan of Dan is living in Zorah, and the Philistines are in charge down in their Timnah area, which is kind of their center. And Samson goes down there, and he saw a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, "I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as a wife." Uh-oh. Here's where we start getting into trouble with this story, don't we? Couldn't we just skip this verse? No, you can't. His father and mother replied, "Isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among all of our people? Must you go down to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife?" But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me. She is the right one for me." His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines. The Old Testament is not a record of the way God would like things to be, but the extent to which he is willing to go to try to reach people. So the story goes on. Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. Verse 5. As they approached the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a young lion came roaring toward him. Now the next thing is one of our key misunderstandings here. You see this piece of artwork? We always depict Samson this way, don't we? Huge, bulging muscles. Oftentimes depicted even bigger than this. That's the way we depict it. Does it say anything here about huge, bulging muscles when the roaring lion comes out? No, it doesn't say anything about that. It says, a young lion came roaring toward him. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him. You realize there has not been any reference to the size of Samson's muscles clear up to this point. Nothing. Nothing identifying him as being particularly large, tall, muscular. Nothing. Not there. It says, the Spirit of the Lord came on him. Now, you're going to have to wrestle with that as we go along, because that's what it says. Came on him in power so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat. I don't care how big muscles you give Samson in your picture in your head. They're not big enough to unscathed tear a lion apart. He apparently wasn't even scratched. Okay, forget the big muscle bit, huh? I don't care how big your muscles are. You're not going to get away with that. How did it happen? It says, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. But he told neither his father nor his mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked to the woman, and he liked her. Some time later, he went back to marry her. He turned aside to look at the lion's carcass. It was a swarm of bees with some honey was in it, which he scooped out with his hands and ate as he went along. When he rejoined his parents, he gave them some, and they too ate, but he did not tell them that he had taken the honey from the lion's carcass. Now, why is that important? Because it goes into the next part of the story. Now his father went down to see the woman, and Samson made a feast there, as was customary for bridegrooms. When he appeared, he was given 30 companions. Oh, you know, sometimes I think wedding parties line up an awful lot of attendants. Nothing like this. 30 of them here. He's got 30 attendants, and he says, let me tell you a riddle. This Samson was kind of a clever guy. Not smart, but clever. You know there is a difference, don't you? Not smart, but clever. Let me tell you a riddle, Samson said. If you can give me the answer within 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. If you can't tell me the answer, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. Okay, what are the odds in this wager? Come on, mathematicians. How many is there of Samson? How many companions? What's the odds? 30 to 1. Well, I suppose each one of them could have used another set of clothes. What in the world does Samson need with 30 sets of clothes? I told you he's clever, but he's not smart. 30 to 1 odds. Tell us your riddle, he said. Let's hear it. He replied, out of the eater came something to eat, out of the strong something sweet. For 3 days they could not give the answer. On the 4th day they said to Samson's wife, coax your husband into explaining the riddle to us, or we will burn you and your father's household to death. The Old Testament is not a record of the way God would like stories to be. It's a record of the way they are. On the 4th day they said to Samson's wife, coax him to tell us the riddle. Samson's wife threw herself on him, sobbing, you hate me, you don't really love me. You've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer. I haven't explained it to my mother or father, he said. Why should I explain it to you? Hey, this is the wedding week. Come on, people. So on this, I haven't explained it to them, so why should I explain it? She cried the whole 7 days of the feast. So on the 7th day, he finally told her, because she continued to press him. She in turn explained the riddle to her people. This was not, I think, what God had in mind. Maybe here was a potential to make contact, and Samson blows it. And then you know how the story goes. She tells them, verse 18, before sunset on the 7th day, the men of the town said to him, what is sweeter than honey and what is stronger than a lion? And he said, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. And in the interest of little ears, let's not go into a lot of detail here. But it turns out that he goes out and finds 30 men and steals their garments and brings them and gives them back. And it escalates one after another. They're striking back at each other until finally he ties the tails of foxes together. You know, I often wondered how in the world he caught 300 foxes. How long did this take? The guy was clever. He was not smart. Caught 300 foxes and tied their tails together and fastened a torch to, set them loose in the grain fields and burned down, well, he burned down all kinds of stuff. Burned up the stalks and standing grain together with the vineyards and the olives. When the Philistines who did this, they were told Samson. So they go after him. And the people of his village are frightened of the Philistines, and they come to Samson and they say, we're going to tie you up. And he says, all right, I'll let you tie me up, but promise that you won't hurt me. And they said, okay. So they tied him up. Verse 13, we will only tie you up and hand you over to them. We will not kill you. So they bound him with new ropes and led him up from the rock. As he approached, the Philistines came toward him and shouting. And then it says this same line again, which is very distressing. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. Wasn't all the muscles. Does it make you uncomfortable when the Spirit of the Lord comes on him and he does this stuff? The Old Testament is not a record of the way God wanted things to be, but the extent to which it was necessary for him to go in order to try and reach perverted people. Any perverted people here today? Well, I can testify for one. The ropes on his arms became like charred flax. Bindings dropped from his hands, and he finds the jawbone of a donkey and makes a great slaughter. Tragic. But then verse 20 comes in, which is interesting. God finally being able to get him around to the purpose. Verse 20 of chapter 15, Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. We kind of forget that one, don't we? We tell these gruesome stories where the Spirit of the Lord comes on him and forget that for 20 years he led these people. But let's go on because we're running out of time. We've got to get to what's the point. He falls in love with Delilah, the valley of Sorek where she lives. And this was not a good love affair. Chapter 16, verse 6. So Delilah said to Samson, tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued. Now, if the secret of Samson's great strength was the bulk of his size and his huge muscles, she wouldn't have needed to ask the question, right? So that was not it. What was the secret of his strength? By the way, it wasn't even his hair. You'll see that in a minute. It was that the Spirit of the Lord came on him. The hair was symbolic. Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued. Really? I told you Samson was clever, but he was not smart. So he answered her, if anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I will become as weak as any other man. So he allows her to tie him up. Why would he do that? We'll get to it. When the men hidden in the room she called him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Then Delilah said to Samson, you made a fool of me. You have lied to me. Samson, get over these kind of women. Come now and tell me how you can be tied. And he said, if anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man. So Delilah took new ropes and tied him with them. Then with men hidden in the room, I wonder how big her place was anyway. With men hidden in the room, she called him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he snapped the ropes off his arms as if they were threads. Did he do that with his huge muscles? No. I'm sorry. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him. Have mercy. Then Delilah said to Samson, until now you have been making a fool of me and lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied. And he replied, if you were to weave the 7 braids of my head. Uh-oh. We're really starting to play with it now, aren't we? We're getting around to the hair bit. If you weave the 7 braids of my head into the fabric on the loom and tighten it with a pin, I'll become as weak as any other man. So while he was sleeping, oh, come on. While he was sleeping, have you ever watched anybody use a loom? Really? You're sleeping through that while they're weaving your hair into the cloth? Samson was clever, but he was not smart. You know, you've got that shuttle and you throw it back and forth and you pull this thing up, boom, 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 boom. And she's weaving his hair in it. And he's asleep. Who are you kidding? While he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his head and wove them into the fabric and tightened it with a pin. And she called him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep, pulled the pin and the loom with the fabric. Can you get this picture? He's got this long hair. He's walking out of the room with the whole cloth and everything dragging behind him. How did that happen? The Spirit of the Lord came upon him. The Old Testament is not a record of the way God would have things to be, to the extent, even at the risk of being misunderstood, that he's willing to go to try to reach people. It's the only way I can handle this story. Then she said to him, how can you say you love me when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you have made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was tired to death, so he told her everything. No razor has ever been used on my head, he said, because I am a Nazirite set apart to God since birth. If my head were shaved and my strength would leave me, I would become as weak as any other man. Okay, let's figure this out. I have a suspicion that Samson had come to the place that he really thought he was that strong. He really thought this Spirit of the Lord coming on me was maybe not the issue. Maybe he actually was that good. And the only way he can find out is to throw it all away. Because as long as he's debating whether it's him or the power of the Lord, he can't know. So he tells her everything. And they shave his head. After they shaved his head, did his muscles shrink? Did he look different? No, in fact, he doesn't even know it. This is chapter 16, verse 20. Then she called Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out as before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Spirit of the Lord had left him. Oh, dear people. Let us have families and children who know that without the Spirit of the Lord, we're all powerless. Let us learn the lesson of the Samson Syndrome. That we don't have to throw it all away in order to find out how weak we are. The story ends tragically, but well. Samson's eyes are put out and he is put grinding the mill. walking in circle, something that oxen usually do, and he's blind. And day after day, he pushes this stone grinding in the mill. But while he is doing that, well, the Philistines weren't too bright either, because his hair starts growing back. I don't know how long that takes, how long it needed to get, but a good period of time goes by and his hair grows and he gets the Spirit of God, not from his hair, but from his heart. In verse 26, they're having a big feast, and Samson says, "Put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them." And they lead him to the pillars. In verse 28, then Samson prayed, "O Lord, sovereign Lord, remember me. O God, please strengthen me just once more." Verse 29, bracing himself against them, his right hand on one and his left on the other, Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. And in the end, Samson destroys what God wanted to set aside in the first place, and that was the false worship of the Philistines. But unfortunately, he dies, and they die in it as well. The Samson Syndrome. When we come to the place that we think we really are that strong, it is a lesson particularly for leadership. Because when we confuse the gift of God that He gives to us in our families and in our church and in our community, thinking that we actually are that strong, and the only way we can find out is to throw it all away. The Samson Syndrome is a terrifying lesson for all of us. Don't throw it away.